2020 went traversing from door to door. By then, clean drinking water was a luxury to 600 families. Kidney patients were on the rise with a water purification system insufficient to meet their demands. Gum Madda came forth once more to alleviate their woes. Gum Madda, for the people, by the people.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And a very good evening to you and welcome to Newsline Zoom. I'm in location somewhere in the south, and my guest is somewhere closer to the city of Colombo in Sri Lanka, of course. And this evening we thought we'd talk about human rights, the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Is it needed? Should it be put in the nearest Newsline dustbin or something else? Let's talk about this with somebody who knows a thing or two. My guest this evening has an abiding interest in the law and human rights and also on matters constitutional. He's no stranger to the program, Dr. Gehan Gunatilleke. Very good evening to you, Dr. Gehan.
Good evening, and thank you for having me on the show again, Faraz.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you. Now then, everyone that I seem to know, and judging by the messages that I receive here, are all asking why Hejaz Hezbollah has not been granted bail in spite of the Attorney General's Department apparently saying that they have no objection. And so I thought I'd open the innings by asking you to explain to us why Mr. Hezbollah didn't quite get bail.
Yeah, Faraz. So the Attorney General had agreed to consent to bail. So no one really expected any surprises when the matter came up before the High Court, because when the prosecutor doesn't object to bail, the judge will rarely deny bail. Now, Hejaz was denied bail because the trial judge decided to very strictly apply the provisions of the Prevention of Terrorism Act to the question of bail. Now, there are two stages at which bail can be considered under the PTA. The first stage is when the suspect is in custody, but no indictment has been framed as yet. At this stage, the suspect can be granted bail by the magistrate if the Attorney General consents, right? So that's the first stage at which bail can be considered. The second stage is when there is an indictment that has been received by the High Court. Now, at that stage, it gets a little complicated because even though the AG can consent to bail anytime before the conclusion of a trial, the PTA actually mandates the High Court to remand someone until the conclusion of the trial, even if the AG consents. And that's in the PTA. So despite the fact that the AG consented to bail, the High Court judge strictly applied the PTA and decided to deny bail. So what's happened in Hejaz's case the other day was precisely a strict application of the PTA, because he's at the second stage I mentioned, where the indictment has already been served and the trial has begun. So the High Court just decided that it doesn't have power to grant bail. And the case, I think, exemplifies just how rotten, absolutely rotten the PTA is.
Now, today, Dr. Gehan, I'm sure you are aware, today marks 26 years since the bombing of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. It cost many lives and several central bankers lost their lives, innocent civilians too. And also at the central bank, those affected and others who were caught up in the sort of crossfire, if you like, had life-changing effects thanks to this bombing of the central bank. It's 26 years since that event, but several years after the so-called separatist war, terrorism, whatever you want to call it and label it. So isn't there a case to have laws in place to protect us, you, me, Kavinka, Gehan, and everybody else in Sri Lanka, in our republic, to protect us from the effects of any recurrence? This war, needless to say, has cost Sri Lanka dearly in terms of our economic progress and everything else, you know. So isn't there a need to have some system in place to address this?
No, absolutely. I think you do need laws to be in place that enables certain policing activities, intelligence, security strategies, so on and so forth, right? But a specific law like the PTA has never really helped a country like Sri Lanka prevent terrorism. At the end of the day, what prevents terrorism is good policing, good intelligence, smart security strategies. Those are the things that keep citizens safe. I don't think there's a single example out there where the PTA can be credited for foiling, say, a terror plot or even putting a militant leader behind bars. I don't think we can think of a single high-profile terrorist that has been convicted under the PTA. Instead, what the PTA has become in practice is a tool of repression. And it has been a black hole that has sort of consumed so many people. It's been used against journalists, it's been used against political actors, and now against lawyers such as Hizbullah. So I really, at the end of the day, while there is a need to protect citizens, it's not laws like the PTA that will do that job. So there's no reason for a rotten law like the PTA to be on our statute books.
And again, I suppose 26 years later, we must be thankful that our security forces, members of our army, Air Force, Navy, police, and the intelligence services, that they all came fused together and, in a way conspired to finish the war, which is probably why I'm sitting where I am and you're seated where you are, and life is getting back to some sense of normalcy and so on. And our economy, notwithstanding COVID, is, we're getting on. So what is the best system to do? I mean, if the government of the day, whichever the government, strengthens our military, for example, there will be claims that Sri Lanka is being militarized. But are we to sort of agree with that point of view and reduce our military numbers, our armed forces numbers and so on, and sort of be complacent? Can we afford to be complacent? Or is it that can we afford not to have a strong military and intelligence apparatus?
No, I think there's no doubt that we and any country for that matter needs a strong apparatus, a mechanism to deal with threats, right? And no one is denying that fact. In fact, anyone, if you go out on the street and ask the question, do we need a good security system in place? We need intelligent officers. We need well-trained policing units. All of that, people will say absolutely yes. I don't think there's a correlation there between an oversized military and the prevention of terrorism. I think that there's no nexus there. I think if you're at war, of course you need a large, group of personnel to be able to deal with the war. But prevention of terrorism requires smart strategies. And I don't think the size is what matters. I think it's the quality and not the quantity that matters. Having said that, we go back to the PTA. I don't think we can attribute or credit the PTA for any of the quote-unquote successes as far as prevention of terrorism is concerned. The PTA is ultimately a black mark on our statute books. And I think that's why there have been so many calls for its repeal over the decades. It was first introduced in 1979. Mind you, it's a good 43 years old, and it was first brought in as a temporary provisions act. And here we are, 43 years later, still talking about this archaic piece of legislation that has been nothing but a black mark on our statute book. So I really think the connection that we can draw between the PTA and the actual prevention of terrorism is quite a tenuous connection.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was famously the Secretary of Defense at the time in the last near 10 years of the war, or 5 years till 2009 anyway. And from an operational point of view, I suppose that the intelligence services, the then commander of the army, and indeed the defense secretary at the time, now the president, will perhaps argue that the PTA did allow them to act swiftly, if not incisively, to act swiftly and to keep these people behind bars, people whom they hopefully had prima facie evidence of being terrorists and being involved in the separatist war. What do you say to that sort of an argument?
I mean, you can use ordinary criminal law to do the absolute same thing. The PTA gives you powers where confessions to a police officer are admissible as evidence. How does that help prevent terrorism? It allows for a person to be kept in custody without production before a magistrate, where even allegations of torture can't be properly inquired into. How does that help us prevent terrorism? When someone like Hijaz, who is accused of something as ridiculous as making a statement to some children some years ago, inciting them to cause violence against the Catholic community, that's the allegation against Hijaz. I won't go into that allegation, but if someone like that can't get bail, even when the AG, Attorney General, consents to bail, the question is, how does that help us or protect us from terrorism? So I sincerely doubt this nexus between the PTA and the actual prevention of terrorism. We can credit the prevention of terrorism, the defeat of separatist movements, all of that to exceptional military strategies or smart policing or a variety of things. That's up for debate. But I certainly doubt that a law like the PTA can be credited for any of that. I have no issues with people taking credit for good strategy, but I think it will be disingenuous and facetious to say the PTA had anything to do with that.
How would you, we're just coming up to our break, but just ahead of that, how would you compare the American use of Guantanamo Bay? Clearly, it was done to circumvent the laws applicable on the mainland USA, and people were held without trial, and they were basically treated worse than animals would be, wild animals being caged somewhere. We saw that they weren't able to practice their religion and so on, and they were just kept there. And even President Barack Obama found it difficult in the extreme to disband the whole Guantanamo Bay facility. How do you can we have a connection between our PTA and the American use of Guantanamo Bay?
So our PTA, I mean, that's a great question. Our PTA preceded all of that. It came in 1970. But having said that, the whole apparatus of Abu Ghraib in Iraq and Guantanamo Bay, that was an absolutely horrendous, inexcusable violation of human rights by the US government. I think there's no, sidestepping that issue. In fact, when I was in the US, I was working with a clinic, one of the university clinics that worked on detainee cases, and I saw some of the absolutely gross human rights violations that were committed in those facilities. So I don't think we can ever say that the US has a clean record when it comes to counterterrorism. And luckily, its own institutions, the Supreme Court itself, found that certain rights had been violated, and detainees did win their cases. And ultimately, I mean, there's a famous film called The Mauritanian, which should be watched by anyone. It's such a fascinating film where this individual had to fight his case for years before finally being released. And in many ways, it reminds me of the case of Hijaz Hizbullah. So I don't think any country can really afford to claim that it has a clean record. There are many countries, even in the West, including the US, that has a very, very black record when it comes to counterterrorism. And at the end of the day, laws and these types of detentions, the malpractices and the abuses have never really protected citizens from terrorism. It's something completely different to that.
And on that note, let's go for a quick break, take a little peek at this evening's Primetime News, which is, of course, produced by that young and vibrant Newsfirst Primetime News team. We'll see you on the other side of the break, shall we?
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Who is tampering with the water levels of the Nuwara River? Opposition leaders pledge to farmers. President and Minister of Power hold discussions. Will there be power cuts in the future? Who was behind the attack carried out against the JVP?
පහත් නින්දිත තිරිසන් ක්‍රියාමාර්ගවලින් අපිත් එක්ක හැප්පෙන්න දෙන්න එපා.
Drug bust of over 3.5 billion rupees.
KDK, the leader in indoor air quality. Over 110 years in bringing you the best of Japanese innovation and technology. KDK, the reliable fan.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Welcome back to Newsline Zoom. I'm on location in the southern part of Sri Lanka, which is extremely pretty and getting to be full of tourists. Long may that happen, because I'm sure it'll make the governor of the central bank's heart go pitter-patter. Well done indeed. My guest this evening is Dr. Gehan Gunatilleke, who, as said previously, has an abiding interest in matters constitutional and human rights issues too. Now then, Dr. Gehan, welcome back to the program. What about these amendments to the PTA? Do we need these amendments, or do we shove the whole thing in the nearest dustbin?
Yeah, this is the dilemma, right? When something is that rotten, anything that's brought in as an improvement is a good thing and has to be welcome, right? But I think it's important to maybe recall some of the really problematic provisions of the PTA in the first place, because after all, this is what everyone has been talking about. This is why there have been calls consistently for the PTA to be repealed. Number one, and this is exemplified in Hijaz's case, suspects are denied bail once the trial begins, and that's extremely unreasonable. Right? If you're a murder suspect, you can, apply for bail, right? But if you're a suspect like Hijaz, accused of making some statement to some children somewhere, you are denied bail. And even when the Attorney General has consented to bail, even when the government wants to give you bail, the judge can claim that their hands are tied under the PTA. So that's extremely unreasonable. That's number one. Number two, confessions to a police officer. They're admissible as evidence against the suspect. I mean, that's ridiculous. You don't want to have a situation where suspects at the mercy of law enforcement, who are in their clutches, vulnerable to abuse and torture, making a statement, and that statement being admissible as evidence. Under the normal or evidence ordinance, such evidence is not admissible. It's not admissible as evidence, right? There's such statements. But under the PTA, it is. And that's another very, very serious problem within the PTA. Number three, long-term detention. Someone can be held for 18 months without a trial under detention. And that's an unreasonably long period. And finally, under the normal law, when you're arrested, within 24 hours, sometimes 48 hours, depending on the provision, you have to be produced before a magistrate. That's a basic human right. Why? Because the magistrate can assess whether you have been mistreated. That's a basic human right that has been built into our law, and it's available under any proper democratic legal system around the world. The PTA takes that away, and you're not given that right to be produced before a magistrate within a particular period of time. Now, there are some good amendments that have been brought in by these proposals, I must say so. For example, a magistrate will be required to visit PTA detainees. Now, that is anyway a requirement under our law, but it is sort of solidified by these amendments. Then there was a section that was prohibiting publication of any matter relating to an offense under the PTA, which is a ridiculous section. That entire section, I think it's section 14, has been repealed. So there are some good amendments, but unfortunately, the issues that I mentioned, those 4 issues, denial of bail, confessions, long-term detention, and this requirement to produce someone before a magistrate, these issues are not addressed by the amendments. So in fact, Hijaz's situation would be no different under the amended PTA, because under the amended PTA, the High Court would still be required to remand the suspect until the conclusion of the trial. So nothing would have changed. So in the end of the day, at the end of the day, Hijaz's case really demonstrates just how unfair and rotten the PTA and its amendments are really. So I don't think the amendments do enough. It takes us in the right direction, but a lot more needs to be done in order to address some of those problems I mentioned.
Now, I put it to you, Dr. Gehan Gunatilleke, that much of these problems stems from the fact that there is so much of, let's call it corruption, let's call it politicization of our judicial process. You have policemen who are routinely forced to answer calls from politicians and release their chum-chums and their lackeys and their associated mates and so on. That's one thing. We had an almost infamous case of accusations against judges of our system. One person is serving a jail sentence not far from where I am, actually. And so there's very little confidence in that whole process. Isn't that why people such as you are getting all activated to bring about some semblance of equity and fair play? Isn't that the problem, that this whole blessed system is, we have golden nuggets from time to time. We had the case of Mr. Azad Salih being released after 9 months of being deprived of his liberty, and only to be completely discharged, because some of the stuff was edited or not shown, and so on and so forth. So it's all about this business that our system isn't working. Isn't that why there's concern from people like you, may I call you activists? Isn't that why that is gaining ground?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that there is a problem and people are worried about the system as a whole. Having said that, there are many actors within the system who have fought against the system and have been able to show independence and credibility. So really it's about also allowing those people to exercise their duties and discharge their duties in a way that is consistent with the law and consistent with their mandate. So we have to free them up to do that. You take Hijaz's case again. It's quite a remarkable case, because now we have a situation where, and I don't want to comment too much on the case, I'm just confining myself to what is reported in the media also. You have a situation where the main witness has failed to provide evidence to support the allegations leveled against Hijaz. And now that's reported in the Sunday newspapers. So the main witness has already contradicted purported previous statements. And then the prosecutor is severely reprimanded by the judge for leading the witness.
That was interesting, because the prosecution wanted to amend the indictment.
Exactly. I'm just coming to that. Now, obviously, the judge has reprimanded the prosecution. So the judge is now showing a lot of independence. So we have to trust the judge to do the right thing, right? So the situation went so badly, and you're quite right for us, that the prosecutor then requested to amend the indictment. I mean, imagine that. Imagine after having a person in custody for 21 months, having so many so-called investigators gathering evidence, interrogating so many children to try and get from them something incriminating. And mind you, several of those children went to Supreme Court and complained that they were coerced to give false evidence. After all of that, they end up trying to amend the indictment on the first day of the trial. It's absolutely shambolic.
Isn't it like shifting the goalposts?
Well, there was an attempt, but having said that, the judge refused. So, which means that we have to be able to trust the High Court. We have to be able to trust the judge, and we have to hope that there is independence in the system. And I believe that there are people who have credibility and integrity, and therefore we place our trust in them, right? So, I mean, if I were the government, and I'm not the government, of course, but if I were the government, I'll just drop the charges and release Hijaz because the case seems to be a shambles. But having said that, there is confidence that there is still independence and there will be an acquittal if the case goes on. But we have to just be able to trust the system because there's no other choice in these situations. We have no choice but to place our trust in the system and hope that the right result comes out. And so far, the signaling by the judge has been that there is absolutely no problem in that department.
Successive governments have, as you say, this was the PTA was introduced as a temporary measure, and 40 odd years later, we've had several governments in place, and not one of these sausages have wanted to address the issue and amend it or make it more equitable and to be in line with international standards and expectations. Why has there been such a sort of blasé attitude about this? Does it work for each government whenever they're in power?
So that's $1 million question, because I think it is a lot to do with politics and what you signal to the public when you go about repealing these laws. I think no government wants to signal to the public that they will be lax on national security. The PTA, more than anything, has become a symbol. It's a symbol of a strong government that takes national security seriously. No one looks at the details, right? When you look at the details, you know that it is not the case. But because of the symbolic value of the PTA, governments are hesitant to repeal it because that will give the signal that they're going to be lax on questions of national security. But I think it takes a stronger government to come forward and say, look, we don't need these laws that are repressive in order to deliver national security. We have a system in place with excellent police officers, excellent investigators, excellent intelligence mechanisms to actually deal with that. And that is what's going to keep you safe. If someone comes forward and makes that claim convincingly, I think the citizens will start to realize that laws like the PTA are never going to protect them. We need it off the statute books. In fact, all it has done is repress and oppress people that have nothing to do with terrorism. So we need it out of our statute books so we can hold our head up high even amongst the international community. Whereas when it comes to security matters, we need to be smart and we need to have quality over quantity.
Well, Dr. Gehan Gunatilleke, thank you very much for being on Newsline Zoom and for your thoughts and your ideas. And long may Sri Lanka head towards an equitable society where we are all safe, irrespective of our backgrounds, whether we are Sinhalese, Tamil, Perga, Malay, God knows what. We are all Sri Lankan at the end of the day. Dr. Gehan Gunatilleke, I've much enjoyed having you on the program. Thank you. And that's the way it was on Newsline Zoom tonight. And take care. And as always, God bless you.